Hi, and welcome to Insight. I'm Polly, editor and co-publisher at the Mountain Times, and with me today is Christina Kumka, PEG TV producer and reporter. And our guest today is U.S. Representative Peter Welch. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. Peter Welch has been active in Vermont politics since 1980 when you were first elected Vermont Senate for Windsor County,
right.
I believe.
That's right.
And I know that you've been very busy over the past many years, but recently you've been working on passing college affordability legislation, reforming corn-based renewable fuel standards that's driving up the feed costs for our farmers and damaging our small engines, and urging restrictions on drones to protect privacy, along with fully funding the roads and bridges in Vermont and Rutland and across the country. So we want to get to all of those topics. We don't have a ton of time, but I thought we'd start actually by just asking, why are you in Rutland today?
Well, you know, it's winter in August is about to take place as we're filming this. And I love coming to winter in August in Rutland. You know, it's such a celebration, who would believe it, of the mountain and skiing and how important that is to Rutland and how much it means to this community. So it's always been one of my favorite summer events. And when I tell my colleagues in Washington that I'm going to a winter in August, they kind of scratch their heads. And I'm trying to invite some of them to come up here and see why we love it so much in Rutland and all over the county. So that's why I'm here, and I'll have been there by the time this airs. But I'm confident it will be as good as it always is.
Absolutely. Is winter in August an unusual event? You said that your colleagues kind of scratch their head. I imagine it's not popular.
Well, they don't understand celebrating skiing in the summer.
Yes.
You have to be from Rutland County to understand what the link is. But you know, it is a great story because the mountain has been such a big part of the economy. And there were pioneering folks up there like Prentice Smith, and other business leaders here who had a vision, and they've implemented it. And the ski industry is always having lots of challenges, cost challenges, snowmaking challenges, weather challenges. In fact, a lot of the concern that many of our folks in the ski industry in Vermont have is climate change and how it's really changing our winter systems. So it's a very tough industry, but it's really important. And one of the things we have to do is always get the word out to folks around New England, because we've got millions and millions of people close by who can come here in the winter. And when they come, it helps our local economy. So winter in August is reminding us that fall is around the corner and winter is soon to follow. So it's good to be.
It gets everybody jazzed up about the snow.
It does, and it's just a lot of fun. You know, the street is closed down, and there's a lot of good food down there, and people are in a good mood. And you know, it's one of the great things about Rutland. There's just a great community spirit here, and a lot of times you see it, unfortunately, after something like a really bad natural disaster, Irene, or remember that hurricane we had about 8 years ago, or that tornado, the Noricane that came right down. Right down from Killington and did so much damage, and people always pull together. The blood drive, you know, where we've got the record, or I should say you've got the record, and Rutland's got the record. That's something to really be quite proud of. So now this is not a disaster. This is a celebration, pure and simple, and then a reminder, hey, let's get people to come here to Rutland.
I think it's interesting too how the event really shows how integrated all of the region is, and it's not just the ski economy. It really affects, you know, downtown Rutland and the whole region as a whole. And also, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Vermont has more tourists in the summertime actually than in the wintertime.
I think that's right.
So it does work both ways.
It really does.
Yeah.
That's right. And you know, and it wasn't always the case. People would come here in the winter for skiing, but the secret that we know, those of us who live in Vermont, that the summer is pretty special, the word's getting out. But welcome, you know, we want people to come.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, I think, that togetherness, to talk about some of the bills, the bipartisan effort that you're known for, on some of the bills that have been progressing that you've spearheaded. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the Federal Highway Trust Fund and the status of that?
Well, you know, the Highway Trust Fund is an example of congressional dysfunction. I mean, every state has potholes, and they've got to be fixed. Every state has roads and bridges that need to be maintained. And you have to have a sustainable long-term revenue source to pay to keep our highways safe and our bridges safe. And what Congress is doing is just passing like 5 or 6 month funding mechanisms that are gimmicks. Like the latest one was paid for through April with something called, quote, pension smoothing. And basically what that does is let corporations pay less into the pension fund, and then the tax on those corporations will be a little higher. That money then goes into the road fund. So what we're doing with that gimmick, I'll put it in simple language, we're creating a pothole in future pensions to fix a pothole in the highway system. Now I voted against that. And the reason I did is I think we have to have a long-term sustainable funding source in order to meet our long-term transportation needs. My hope is that this temporary measure will give us time to do something that's permanent. And by the way, this is an area where Republicans and Democrats generally agree, because we have to have good roads, we have to have good bridges, we have to have good solid airports. By the way, Rutland Airport really does benefit from the transportation funds that we've been able to get, the essential airport funds, and some of the programs we've gotten to extend the runway and to improve that. And that's a vital component of our local economy. Companies like GE really need it to be able to do their job. But I'd like to see us get a bipartisan long-term funding solution, because a good infrastructure program means jobs locally. It means building our economy, and you can't have a modern economy with a 19th or 20th century infrastructure.
So what's it going to take to get that done? What's it going to take to bring Congress together enough to pass something that is a long-term and sustainable plan?
Well, you know what it does? We've just got to do our job. It's not rocket science. I think to some extent this moment is getting a little bit more difficult because we do have elections coming up. And will the House stay Republican? Will the Senate stay Democrat? It's all in play. And the closer you get to the election, and this is a sad commentary to some extent, but it's true, there's a lot more hesitation because both sides are thinking if they do better in the elections, then they'd rather deal with this after the election than before. But the reality is, the longer we delay doing things like fixing roads and bridges, the more expensive it gets. It's exactly right. It's like home maintenance. You know, you put it off because you don't want to make that difficult decision to write the check. But then you wait a year and the roof is really leaking and you got to replace it, not repair it.
The whole thing.
Yeah. So I'm just going to keep pushing.
Are there any other bills that you think were a success this past session between Republicans and Democrats? Because I've read a lot about your effort to kind of just blur that line, erase that line, and get stuff done.
Well, I do try to do, I mean, that's what we do in Vermont. I mean, this isn't like Peter Welch trying to do something special. This is like Peter Welch, Vermonter, doing what Vermonters do, and that is, hey, there's a problem. Where do we agree? How can we move forward? And I'll give an example. One of the things that I hear about from parents and students is just the enormous expense of higher education. You know, we have to have it. You can't move ahead and get into the economy and make a contribution without higher education. You've got to have it. But it's too expensive. And students are graduating with these debts and averages over $30,000. And then I've talked to parents in Vermont where they've got 2 or 3 kids, and there's no way they're going to be able to get to pay for all those kids to go to school. So I've done 2 things. One, work with others to try to make sure that we maintain federal funding. And by the way, Rutland should be really proud because Senator Jeffords, who was my predecessor in the House, and Senator Stafford, both of Rutland, they are 2 of the revered figures in Washington for the work they did in making college accessible and affordable through loans and grants. So we've got to maintain that. But the other thing we have to do is really get the cooperation of our college administrators to keep a lid on those tuition increases. So Trey Gowdy and Trey Gowdy is a very conservative Republican from South Carolina. He's the Republican head of the Benghazi Committee.
Very outspoken.
He's very outspoken, very colorful guy, and very conservative guy. But he and I agree on something, and that is if we can provide flexibility to our college administrators in a way that allows them to keep tuition costs down, let's do it. So we propose legislation that's been passed in the House, and I think we got a good shot at getting it through the Senate that does two things. One, it creates a commission, including college administrators and Department of Education, to look at all these regulations that a lot of the college administrators were telling Mr. Gowdy and me are costing us money and not improving quality. So we want to review those, and ones that work and do something, keep them. Ones that are costing money and not accomplishing anything, get rid of them. And then the second thing is that we want to allow for what's called competency-based learning, where people in high school who are doing things that allow them to get college credit, we really want to encourage that, so that a student who wants to get through in, say, 3.5 years instead of 4 years, or 4.5, they're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And that saves a lot of money. I mean, you
Yeah.
save a semester of tuition, that's real money.
Well, that's what's really happening in Rutland with Stafford Technical Center and Rutland High.
Right.
They're giving kids college credits and giving them credits for out-of-classroom internships so they can
Right.
get into CCV and Castleton.
And a leg up.
Yeah, and there are certain cases where high school kids are in CCV programs already.
That's exactly it. And see, it's interesting you mention that, because what I do in Washington is generally take something that Vermonters have been doing that's a good idea.
Resourceful.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
and say, hey, this works. Let's try it down here. And that's an example of it, because I was talking to a lot of our college administrators. They told me about that program and about the regulations. I talked to Mr. Gowdy. And of course, a lot of the students down there really face the same thing. It's not like it's a difference for the student, whether it's a Republican legislator or a Democratic legislator, right?
Yeah.
They've got a problem. They want to save money. They want to get a good education. So that was an example of something where we got something done, and let's hope it's helpful. Let's hope it gets through the Senate.
Just to help me better understand, what's an example of a regulation that costs money and doesn't improve education?
Well, you know, there's a lot of compliance requirements, and it's everything from the student aid function to even college athletics, where each time there's a rule or regulation, oftentimes the administrators complain that they have to have somebody doing compliance. And in some respects, we want to be able to simplify things so that, for instance, there's some regulations that are good. Title IX, that allows women access to sports.
Right.
And that's really good. But I've had a lot of complaints about the application process for filling out student loans. For instance, you have to fill out a lot of financial information. That's fair and square. But why not just let a person who's applying make their tax return available so that that information doesn't have to be regurgitated, okay?
That's a good example.
And that costs money, hiring somebody to get the information that could be readily available.
Right.
Okay.
That's a great one. You know, college affordability seems to be something that I think, you know, we've heard in our respective zones.
You know what? It's
affecting-
really, really tough when you get out of school. And a parent oftentimes refinances their home.
Yeah.
I mean, I met a Vermont family where they'd been working for 30 years, and they had their kids going to college, and they did everything they could on grants and on loans, and it just wasn't going to make it.
Yeah.
So they had to basically give up the equity that they built up in their house, and it meant they were going to be working a few more years. And these were folks who were looking forward to taking, you know, this cruise that they had been dreaming about for years, and they couldn't do it. And that's tough, and it, you know, it's not good for the country. By the way, and then a student graduates just from college, but if grad school, it's even more, with thousands and thousands of dollars of debt.
Yeah.
That hurts the economy, because that young person is not in a position to put a down payment on a condominium.
Right.
And housing is flat in this recession. They're not able, oftentimes, to afford a car or a good car or a new car. They're not up purchasing furniture. You know, they're not doing those things that my generation started doing when we graduated without a lot of debt, and we started getting an income because we got a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's very serious for the student, for the parents, and for the economy.
Yeah, it's also a time, I believe, where the economy is still down. It hasn't completely bounced back. So parents are relying on loans and grants to even send their kids to school because they aren't making as much as they maybe would have made 10, 20 years ago.
Well, see, that's exactly right. You know, the the economy is not good for a lot of families, even ones with jobs, because wages have not recovered. You know, it's a tale of two economies, is often pointed out. Folks that are doing well are doing really well, but a lot of people who've been working and managed to keep their employment through that terrible downturn, their wages are where they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But the expenses are not there. They're way up. So that's very, very tough on families.
It seems like, you know, the kids, you know, students who are coming out of colleges and our university systems also face huge challenges in just getting one of those jobs.
Well, it's true. It's really a harder time. And I was talking to a young person the other day, and she was telling me about sending out 300 resumes and not even getting a reply.
Wow.
And I just can't imagine dealing with that discouraging situation. But you've got to hang in there, as you know, because you hang in, you'll get that job.
Yeah.
But oftentimes that job is not it's not paying enough to pay the student loan, help you get a reasonable place to live.
Yeah.
So a lot of young people are doubling up, you know, if they go into a city.
Yeah.
But you've got to get the education.
Yeah.
And my job, our job in Washington and in Montpelier is to try to make it more affordable.
And I think, you know, what you were saying before too about the internships and the, you know, always sort of working one step ahead. When you're in college, you're doing internships in a career. When you're in high school, you're doing college classes. You know, kind of getting a feel for what the direction you might want and getting the experience. Because, you know, what I hear all the time is I have the on paper I have the masters, I have the, you know, but you don't have the experience, and you're always beat out in these job applications.
Yeah, you really got to hustle.
And you really have to hustle.
And you can't get discouraged.
And if you don't have any experience to show for your education, you know, it's chicken and the egg. How do you get experience if you don't have experience? And you know, nobody will hire you. But I think some of those progressive, you know, programs where you do get the experience while you're still learning, or maybe educational credits for that work, really could help some of those people who are stuck in the rut get to the next level.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's great.
There is one industry in Vermont, though, that is burgeoning, and I think that the last stats that I've heard,
Christina.
There's more than one, but there's one specifically on the top of my head that is producing more jobs in this state than many other industries right now, and that's solar and wind and renewable energy.
That's
so can you talk a little bit about maybe what opportunity is out there for kids with college degrees to get those jobs in Vermont, or maybe something that you've done regarding that?
Well, I think the opportunity there is huge. You know, energy efficiency is such a good policy. You know, in Washington, we're having this big argument about whether climate change is real. I think it is. You talk to folks in the farm, and they say the growing season has changed. You talk to people on the mountain, they say the winter season is a lot different. And it's got ominous implications for our economy. So we've got to do something about it. But in Washington, where a lot of my friends adopt some of the best theories of the 19th century, they're not in favor. They don't believe we have climate change. But I talk to them about energy efficiency, and they get it. So one area we've been successful, Republicans and Democrats, is on energy efficiency. Vermont has embraced that. You know, we were the first state, again, this is a Vermont idea that I just brought to Washington. We were the first state that started an energy efficiency utility. And you know, we've got right here in Rutland, Green Mountain Power, of course, merged with CVPS. And they have a huge commitment to solar and to efficiency and to doing more for less. And what's happening is that new jobs are being created in Vermont in the solar industry, in retrofitting our homes, in installing the special heaters. So these are good jobs and good opportunities for small businesses and large. And we've even got some folks in finance that are focusing on how to help people finance over time the efficiency improvements they're going to make. And what happens, you get a tighter, warmer home, you use less fuel, so you save money, and in the process you create jobs of all those folks that are on the efficiency side or on the alternative energy side.
I know that I've heard from many people living in this city and in the county that their investment of about $50 a month into a community solar farm is really benefiting their electric bills, and they have the ability now to boost the economy by paying for something or buying something that maybe they couldn't have with a higher electricity bill. But as far as the manufacturing jobs, what do you think Vermont needs to do from your view to get maybe more solar manufacturing jobs or renewable energy long-term jobs here?
Well, the industry folks are pushing, and I think you reach a critical mass where the infrastructure to do that work gets established, and we're getting there. We've got Grow Solar. We've got Green Mountain Power that is completely supportive. Very unusual utility because they advocate for efficiency and embrace alternative technology and alternative energies. And then you have these financing mechanisms like you just mentioned, where local people can get a piece of the action. They don't have to buy their own solar panels, which might be something they'd like, but more expensive than they can afford. So then you have the structure where the community can make these micro investments, and then you get to that infrastructure where it then attracts more businesses. And we're getting there. I mean, with the companies that you mentioned, and with the fact that Vermont, on a per capita basis, is getting as much or more jobs than anybody else in this industry.
Related to energy, but on a little slightly different topic, what's going on with the gas tax and ethanol in our fuel? And
Well,
I mean, I
ethanol,
know those are two sort of separate issues, but as a consumer, they're very related to me.
Well, they are. Ethanol was the government policy about using ethanol and blending it in the gas had a well-intended desire. They wanted to make fuel cleaner, and ethanol is produced by corn, and the corn farmers in the Midwest really like this. And to promote this policy, supposedly to have cleaner fuel in a cleaner environment, there was a tariff on importing ethanol, which was about 50 cents a gallon. There was a subsidy of about 45 cents a gallon, and then a mandate that you have to have 10% of a gallon of gas be ethanol. So that's incredible governmental support for this corn-based product. But as it's been implemented, it's wicked problems. It's added to the cost of food, actually. It's added to the cost of grain. So if you're a corn farmer, that's good for you, but if you're a dairy farmer or a hog farmer or a poultry farmer, it's really bad for you because you're paying sometimes 40% more for the cost of your feed. It's had bad environmental impacts because these policies have encouraged overplanting of corn in a lot of conservation areas. And in fact, in parts of Iowa, they've completely lost their wild bird habitat because of the excess planting.
And then not great for soil either because it doesn't encourage rotation of crops.
Well, yeah, really good point. And then the other thing is that it's wreaked havoc on our small engines. You know, I was talking to some folks at county fairs, and they were telling me about their small engines. Then I talked to some folks on the marinas, and they're saying that it's good for business for them because they're having a lot of repairs to do. But you have a small engine, your lawnmower, your boat, your chainsaw. That's what happened to me. My chainsaw got wrecked with ethanol. So there's a lot of problems with it. And we've had a lot of success, bipartisan again, in rolling back some of these policies. We've gotten rid of the taxpayer subsidy, $6 billion savings to the taxpayer. We got rid of the tariff barrier, so if there's, we're not restricting imports on it with a price squeeze. And we kept the EPA from going from a 10% mandate to a 15% mandate. But there's a number of us who think we should get rid of the corn-based ethanol mandate altogether.
Wow.
Speaking of corn, I know this isn't on our list of topics, but it just came to mind. Vermont has been the first state to adopt anti-GMO labeling. What's your opinion of that?
Well, you know, I favor it, and I don't understand where the big companies are getting so hot and bothered about letting people know what's in the product they're selling. I mean, why wouldn't you, if you were selling me something and I asked you what it was, and you told me you wouldn't tell me, wouldn't I be a little suspicious? I I mean, what's the big deal?
Well, I think it's a cheaper way of mass producing products for us. And I think that the large corporations think that if people actually know where their food is coming from, they'll be less likely to buy it.
Yeah, but isn't that our right, to know where our food's coming from?
Vermont thinks so.
Yeah, and I think
well,
most
and so
consumers
does 70 other countries throughout the world.
Yeah,
or whatever it is.
that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, all the European countries have that.
Yeah, we're just the first maybe in the United States,
In the
but
US,
we're
yeah.
certainly
I mean,
not leading
when
the-
some of the big companies talk to me about it, I just kind of scratch my head because I don't understand why the product you claim is so good has to be so secret.
That's a good point.
Good point. Polly, you're up.
Well, yeah, in the interest of time, we only have a few more minutes. I did want to just touch on, you're urging people to have restrictions on drones to protect privacy. Tell me a little bit about that.
Privacy.
Yeah.
Well, the use of drones is not just in Afghanistan and in Iraq and Yemen in a military purpose. Drones are becoming commercially widely available. And there's probably a lot of good things. You've heard maybe that Amazon is thinking they want to deliver packages to us with a drone.
I have not heard that.
Well,
Wow.
it's true. They're experimenting with it. But here's the question: a drone with a camera, hovering around your backyard, looking into your kitchen window, invading your privacy. That's got to be off limits.
Little
And
Big Brother.
it's kind of Wild West out there right now because there are no rules. And what my legislation would do is require the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration that has jurisdiction over drones, to have a privacy policy so that if we're going to use drones, anybody using drones has to, a company more likely than an individual, has to follow rules that guarantee you and me that our privacy won't be invaded with the use of drones. And it's new technology, and sometimes when the technology gets ahead of our privacy rights, we don't want our privacy rights to suddenly vanish. Those are very important to maintain. So that's what Senator Markey and I are doing.
Is there a reason why drones would be used on us as opposed to in Iraq or Afghanistan or in combat situations?
Yeah, there's legitimate commercial uses, and a lot of these are smaller drones, and they're not going to be armed, okay? But like mapping, there's some legitimate photography that can be done. And who knows, maybe Amazon will be able to deliver packages with drones.
So do people push back on your legislation? I mean, it seems that that would be very popular and widely accepted across partisan lines.
We've got a lot of bipartisan support for it. But one of the things you face when you're trying to pass legislation is the resistance from people who want to say no because they fear if we start to do something that's intended to protect privacy, it'll somehow encroach their freedom to do whatever it is they want. So companies are like that a lot of times. So they're just reflexively against it, even though we're saying in a limited way, use your drone, but respect our privacy.
Right. Don't just spy on me for
Right.
no purpose or without my permission, I
Right.
guess, would be the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry, that's just about all the time I had. Is there anything else that you want our audience to know before we turn the cameras off and head to winter in August?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me, and I love being in Rutland, and I just really admire the work the community is doing. There's a lot of challenges here in Rutland, and the kind of collaborative way, for instance, and the community addressing the opiate issue that is not just a Rutland issue, it's a state issue and it's all around the country. But the way the community's coming together to stand up and try to work together, I really admire it.
Yeah, that's a great topic we didn't even touch on, but perhaps next time you come back on Insight. Thank you so much for watching, and this is Insight.